Okay, here we go.
Got it.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Chuck Watts, past president of the First Empathy Surplus Congress and your Zoom master of ceremonies. And today is the August 2021 Caring Citizen Solution Day Speaker Series event. And our keynote speaker today is John Kempf from Advancing Eco Agriculture. Welcome. And before I introduce John properly, I'd like to invite a past president of the First Empathy Surplus Congress, Anita Lewis, to say a few words. Anita, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chuck. I live in Millbrook, and I want to welcome everybody to this First Empathy Surplus Congress. I want to remind you, our YouTube subscribers, that our Empathy Surplus Congress is seeking charter status with the foundation, a 501c3 volunteer collective thought leadership training community of practice. We would love for you to join us on Thursdays from 1:30 to 2:30. Every day, we strive to frame a caring society that promotes stronger Americans, progressive markets, better futures, effective government, and mutual responsibility. We do this with 4 empathic activities. Chuck, would you please read for us the 4 empathic activities?
Sure, absolutely, Anita. All of our 4 empathic activities keep us aligned with our collective thought leadership training mission. And the actions all start with the letter I, inwardly digestion, investment, implementation, invitation. And we inwardly digest and use the latest brain insights of Dr. Lakoff to frame daily caring conversations to promote human rights. We invest in weekly congressional hearings about how we apply Dr. Lakoff's insights to advance caring policy directions. We implement caring policy directions through partnerships with ethical businesses, effective government task forces, and other civil society organizations. And we invite others to join us and promote a politics of care. And back to you, Anita.
Thank you, Chuck. Marie, would you please tell everyone how they can help us build an empathy surplus in their communities with the Human Rights Pocketbook venture?
Thank you, Anita. I'd be happy to. Our parent organization, the Empathy Surplus, joined the United Nations Compact in 2014. In fact, we joined to implement partnership around policy directions growing out of Dr. Lakoff's 10-word progressive philosophy he laid out in Don't Think of an Elephant. Moreover, we thought the Global Compact 10 principles to help ethical businesses make progress in human rights, living, work, leisure, and anti-corruption of government for the sake of climate survival, aligned with our 4 empathic activities. Furthermore, we launched the Human Rights Pocketbook venture in 2018 to use the Illustrated Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a framing tool to facilitate collaboration around the community service of youth rights, human rights education. Every year in our centers of influence, we want to distribute a pocketbook copy to every teacher and student in kindergarten, 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th grades, as well as first-year college students. Our donors and volunteers are currently responsible for donating about 2,000 pocketbooks per year. You can find out more at www.empathysurplus.com. Back to you, Anita.
Thank you, Marie. Chuck, would you please introduce our speaker?
Yes, thank you, Anita. John Kempf is the founder of Advancing Eco Agriculture, a plant nutrition and biostimulants consulting company. His mission is to provide support to the world's farmers and globally impact our food supply. a top expert in the field of biological and regenerative farming. John founded AEA in 2006 to help fellow farmers by providing the education, tools, and strategies that will have a global effect on the food supply and those who are growing that supply. And he has a podcast entitled his Regenerative Agriculture Podcast. And through intense study and the knowledge gleaned from many industry leaders, John is building a comprehensive systems-based approach to plant nutrition, a system solidly based on the sciences of plant physiology, mineral nutrition, and soil microbiology. He has a unique ability to simplify and clearly explain very complex concepts in the areas of soil and plant health. John skillfully discusses the larger social and environmental impacts of food, agriculture, and ecology on his podcast. And he's from Ohio. So help me welcome John Kempf. Glad you're here, John.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me, Chuck. I'm glad to be here. Hi, friends.
Yeah.
So
Hello.
how do we think about, well, there's a few questions that we can begin with that I think all of us should think about and pay attention to. And the first question is, what is the change we want to create in the world? And we have to become really clear on that question, or on the answer to that question, before we can begin making progress towards the goals that we've expressed. And then the second question that I would ask you is, what is an intervention?
Mm-hmm.
What is an intervention? So the way the word is commonly used today, when we think of an intervention, we immediately think of a significant event that someone or some organization reaches a crisis point, and it is a crisis turnaround situation where we really have to dig in deeply and kind of overhaul the situation from the ground up. But I would propose that interventions can actually be much more minor than that. An intervention can be something as simple as trying to persuade someone to wear the same color of socks, or which restaurant to go to for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reality is that every time we try to communicate an idea to someone else and sell them on that idea, to some degree, that is an intervention where we are trying to persuade someone that our advice or our perspective has validity for their life, or that the product that we are selling them is going to improve their life. And of course, in order for us to do that, particularly in the sales arena, we first need to believe deeply that the product we are selling is going to improve their life. And if we don't believe that, then we should get out of whatever we're doing before our soul withers up and blows away. But the reason I bring up the idea of interventions is because on this pathway and on the journey of developing regenerative agriculture systems and presenting them to farmers, we're asking farmers to make some very significant changes, some very difficult changes, because farming is a very difficult way to make a living in today's world. And farmers have tremendous exposure to risk, climatic risks, insect attack, disease attack. So they have a lot of risk. And for most crops, they have a very low margin of profitability, very low margin of error. And so generally, they tend to be very risk averse. And we are asking them to make significant changes and to begin farming using a completely different thought process and a completely different model of how plants and soils work. And as we have developed and improved the way that we communicate to growers, I've constantly been trying to understand how is it that we can communicate our ideas effectively and get large-scale significant adoption, because I'm not really inspired by helping 1,000 farmers in Africa or 1,000 farmers in North America. I think that's useful and important, but my personal mission is to have a much bigger impact, to have a global impact. And so I've been thinking about the question of how do we scale that influence and how do we really speak to people effectively? And I was intrigued to discover that no decision is ever a logical decision. We try to rationalize our decisions. We pretend that they are logical, but in reality, all decisions are emotional. There's actually a really great case study in the literature. It's been quite some time since I read it, but there's this story of a brain surgeon, young man in California who was incredibly gifted intellectually, very grounded, very reliable, great brain surgeon, had a wonderful family with 2 young children. And he was in an automotive accident and suffered a brain injury. And the brain injury left him without the capacity to feel emotion. And his life fell apart. In a matter of a few years, he was homeless. He had no money. He had no family. He had no home because he was incapable of making decisions. He couldn't make the decision to get out of bed in the morning and brush his teeth because he had lost the capacity to feel emotion. And of course, when you lose the capacity to feel emotion, that also means then you lose the capacity to care about what other people think or to care about your impact on the environment. And really comes down to you lose your capacity for empathy as well as for emotion. And so to bring this around full circle, there are a couple of people who have really influenced my thought processes and our success at being able to communicate effectively to people and to farmers on a large scale. And I would say the first that I'll speak about a little bit is Otto Scharmer from MIT, who developed Theory U.
How do you spell that, John?
Otto Scharmer, his last name is Scharmer.
Scharmer.
MER, yes. And Otto has written several exceptional books. He's brought together research from a number of different disciplines. But his one quote that really imprinted itself deeply for me, and I'll paraphrase just a little bit. His quote was that the outcome of an intervention has nothing to do with the skills of the intervener. It has everything to do with the place within from which the intervener comes.
Mm.
And here's a professor who is studying the topic of intervention and selling and creating organizational change at a corporate professional level in the corporate business environment. He's not talking about, this is not science coming from a touchy-feely perspective. And what he is describing, of course, is our capacity to really empathize deeply with the people that we are communicating with. In other words, to put ourselves in their shoes and to care deeply about them. And the better we are able to empathize with them, the more successful our quote unquote intervention will be. If we're trying to sell them a new idea, trying to sell them a product, trying to give them some advice for to create a difference in the world, once we become really clear on what the changes we want to create in the world, then the next step is an intervention in all the people who have the capacity to make the change that we want to see in the world. And then when you consider developing empathy, so the next question becomes, from Otto Scharmer's reference, the next question becomes, how can you develop empathy and deeply understand the other and where people are coming from? Ultimately, if you go down deeply enough, you realize there is no other, there is only I, but that's a philosophical conversation for another day. This brings me to the second mentor that I have tremendously appreciated, and this is Seth Godin. Seth Godin has a number of different workshops.
Spell Seth's last
Seth
name.
Godin, Godin. And Seth has founded many different organizations and written dozens of books. And he is kind of a guru of marketing, if you will. And one of the organizations he has started in the last decade or so is called Akimbo, Akimbo, Akimbo Workshops. And he has one course. I've participated in several of his courses, and there is one that I cannot recommend highly enough, and it's titled, This is Marketing. And the reason I so appreciate Seth's work and his course is that the majority of the course focuses on how to develop empathy with the audience that you want to reach. And he guides you as you go through the course. He guides you through a series of exercises of answering a series of questions about your audience and the people you're trying to have an intervention with. And examples of some of the questions that Seth asks as a homework assignment is, for example, one question is, what is it that they believe? In particular, what is it that they believe to be true that you don't believe to be true? How does your audience have a different worldview from your worldview? What do they do? What do they do that you don't do? What do they see that you don't see? What do they feel that you don't feel? Who are they really deep inside? What do they care about that I don't care about? And when you take the time to really sit with those questions and write down the answers, as I went through Seth's course, I developed an entire document. It eventually turned into, I think, an 80-page document where I went into exhaustive detail on the emotional and intellectual perspective of our audience and the people we wanted to create change with and to have an intervention with. And that has been foundational to the success that we have been able to have and the change that we've been able to create in the world. Because we can also recall, this is another element, another aspect that Seth points out, is that as people, we are all tribal. And we have a cohort of colleagues that we identify with. And within that cohort of colleagues, there is this undefined framework that says people like us do things like this. And the better we can understand who the people like us are and the types of things that people like us do and believe and feel, the more effective we are at developing empathy, and then coming from that right place within so that we're able to have an intervention to create a completely different outcome. And how this has manifested in our work, as our organization has grown, I spend less time presenting to growers and pitching the idea of shifting their farming methodology to individual growers. I'm now working more on training other people. But over the decade or so that I spent time primarily talking to and communicating to growers, it became very clear that data does not convince people to change their minds. Facts do not convince people to change their minds. People change their minds based on emotion and the stories that you communicate that evoke emotion. And as a result of cultivating and coming from that right place within, there's this really interesting phenomenon. I have pitched a sales pitch to farmers to change their farming methodology. I don't have track, but it's well over 1,000 people, one-on-one. And exactly twice, I've had people say no, which is a pretty extraordinary track record. Oh, and the other piece that has not happened, I have never had people ask for data. They don't ask to prove it. Can you prove that this works with data? When people ask for data, that is a rejection, and it tells you that they don't believe the story that you have communicated. And if they don't believe the story you have communicated, it's because you were not successful at coming from the right place within and developing a deep empathy with them. So that kind of wraps up the core that I wanted to speak about. And I'll add one more thought, which is this little rule that everyone knows, but few understand, called the golden rule. We've all heard about the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. But if you ask people to describe the golden rule, and you ask them, what does this mean? The answer is almost universally that it means that if you don't want people to do something to you, then you also shouldn't do it to them. That's the common response. Except that's not actually what the golden rule says. And to clarify that, the response is negative and passive, whereas the golden rule itself is positive and active. So the common perception is to say, don't do these things that you don't want other people to do to you. Well, you can not do things. And by the way, this was a significant evolution in philosophical thought when Jesus described this golden rule, because the negative, passive, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you, was already present in Jewish thought. It was present in Hindu thought. It was present in Muslim philosophy. So the negative was already widely known. He switched that to a positive. So instead of doing nothing, you can do nothing and not do things to people and just withdraw from society and do nothing. But the golden rule is actually active and positive. Do unto others that which you want others to do unto you. And that is also an important essence of navigating the world from a perspective of empathy.
Well, John, that's one of the best 20 minutes I've experienced in a long time.
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
really happy that you're with us today.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm happy to share the inspiration, because we all need inspiration at different moments.
Yeah.
So, I gave a short little bio, that I got off your website and all that, but tell me how you set off on your, on your quest to, save the world, because everybody here wants to save the world. And we can't, we can't save the world, but we can save maybe our particular world, in our particular place. Where did that start?
Well, the vision kind of grew over time. It started with me growing up on a family fruit and vegetable farm in Northeast Ohio, where the farm faced serious difficulties in managing and controlling different diseases and different insects with pesticide applications. We were very heavy pesticide users. In fact, my father was the distributor for pesticides and chemicals in the local region. And we almost had a disaster. Well, we did have a disaster. We had 3 consecutive years in which we'd lost the majority of our crops to a variety of diseases and insects that we were not successful in controlling. And we had some really interesting experiences where we rented a neighboring field that bordered right up against one of the fields that we were farming, where the soil had not had the previous pesticide exposure. And we planted this field into cantaloupe directly across the field border on both the new soil and on the old soil. At harvest time, on the old soil that had the prior decade of intense pesticide exposure, 80% of the leaves had powdery mildew. And on the new soil, there was no powdery mildew, not 5% or 10%, but 0. You couldn't find any. And there was this knife line effect right down through the center of the field where the field border had been. And that led to lots of soul-searching questions, as you can imagine. It was kind of a 2x4 in the face moment. It led to lots of conversations, lots of study, lots of research, and being privileged to meet some exceptional mentors.
So
And
was this all this, all this soul searching, was this from your father, or was this you together, or?
we were together. It was my father's farm. And when I graduated from school, I was given the responsibility of doing all of the drip irrigation on the foliar applications. So I was very heavily involved in the field operations and took a very strong personal interest in it. But it was still my father's farm at this point. I was just a teenager. I
And so
shouldn't say just
you
a
were,
teenager because there's no teenager.
yeah, so you were involved in this, I guess it was a family soul searching.
You could say that, but I was certainly driving it. I was the driving force. I was very frustrated at this point because I was the one spraying all the pesticides. I had a license. I was a licensed private pesticide applicator when I was 16 years old. And so I was putting in a lot of work for minimal or no results. And I made the comment to my dad one time that I might as well do nothing for nothing as do something for nothing. So from the mentors that I was able to develop and the research and the study, I learned that it's possible to manage plant nutrition and microbiology in such a way to enhance plant immune systems so that they can be completely resistant to all diseases and all insects. Putting that into practice on our farm then led to putting that into practice on other farms. Putting that into practice on other farms then led to the realization that when we have these extraordinarily healthy plants, not only do they have a functional immune system, but they can transfer that immunity to the people who consume that food or the livestock. And we can have a legitimate conversation about growing food as medicine. That led to the realization that when we grow extraordinarily healthy plants that are producing food as medicine, we are actually also, those exceptionally healthy plants behave differently. They grow differently. They express themselves differently. And we begin sequestering carbon, building soil organic matter, and regenerating ecology while we are growing a crop. So there is this paradigm, the mainstream paradigm today is that the process of agriculture is in some manner inherently extractive. The process of growing a crop is going to remove organic matter, and it's going to remove minerals from the soil. And that if we then want to rebuild it, we have to grow cover crops or we have to add minerals back to the soil profile. And that's true when we manage our crops and our soils in a degrading way. But when they become really exceptionally healthy, we actually regenerate soil health, we build soil organic matter, and we increase soil mineral availability and biology while we are growing a crop. So agriculture is not inherently extractive. It actually has the capacity to regenerate soil health and to regenerate plant health and livestock health and public health while we are growing a crop.
Gee whiz, John, have you been exposed to the UN Global Compact at all?
Yes, I have.
And
loosely, I'm not intimately familiar with it, but in broad brushstrokes, yes.
So ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council of the UN, where the compact came out of, has posted a two-page PDF concept paper inviting people to imagine the caring economy in order to reframe the currently our degrading way of doing things. We want to sustain it, and of course, if we sustain the degrading way that we do things, we're all going, our species is going to die. And so they've posted this concept paper with 6 questions about how do you imagine the caring circular economy versus the sustainable economy. And hoping that when I think where they're headed is the SDGs in 2030 will become the CDGs, the circular development goals. But it sounds like it's all in, where you're coming from in terms of regeneration and all of that.
Sounds possible. I'm not intimately familiar enough with what they're doing to have a qualified opinion, so I can't really comment.
So
will
it sounds
say
like,
that-
go ahead.
I'll add that I have a bias towards action and not talking. And I think, unfortunately, the UN is perceived by many to be somewhat ineffective, which is sad. And at this moment in time, and with our work at AEA, we're working on about 2 million acres. And we're inspiring change on many more acres than the ones that we are working with directly. And that's the scale of change that I want to see happen in the world. This needs to happen on a global level.
Sure.
Amen. Amen.
Right, right.
So,
I'd like
go
to
ahead.
make a comment about connections throughout the world for the ecology. If more people understood the connections, like how the minerals deposited in Chad in the middle of Africa rise up in the atmosphere, are blown across the Atlantic, and they land in the Guyana Shield and the Amazon, which replenishes the nourishment needed by the Amazon and the Guyana Shield, because every year those minerals are washed downstream or through the atmospheric rivers, which fall on the rest of South America. So every year those minerals have to be replenished, and they're replenished simply by the minerals that are picked up by Chad and transported across the Atlantic.
Yes,
And
exactly.
if more people understood these connections.
Yeah, there is another element that is worth pointing out as well, is that there is a fundamental, there's a foundational assumption to the whole conversation about carbon sequestration and the capacity to for plants to sequester carbon. There's a foundational assumption that is incorrect. And this is so critical and so important that I fail to understand why this is not a primary topic of conversation in the mainstream. But here's the incorrect assumption. The assumption is that photosynthesis is a constant and happens at a constant rate of speed, which is not the case. Photosynthesis can vary tremendously based on the presence of carbon dioxide and sunlight and water, etc. And the key point, the reason this is important is because the plants and crops and the rate of growth and the rate of photosynthesis that we perceive to be normal today is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30% of plants' inherent genetic photosynthetic capacity. So that means that these fields of crops or cover crops or the forests have the capacity to increase their rate of photosynthesis and their carbon sequestration by a factor of 2 to 3 to 4x when provided with the right mineral nutrition and in the right environment. So this is kind of a fundamental conversation to carbon sequestration and regenerating ecology that is largely ignored.
Well, it didn't get ignored today, did it? you brought it up. I've learned something.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
So it sounds like your first intervention was was as a teenager in your own family, where you engaged with your family to make those changes on your family farm.
Yeah, that would be correct.
And from the point of view of the movers and shakers, the decision makers on your farm, was it your father only that made decisions, or was it, how did the decision get made within your family unit for that first intervention to take place?
Well, my father was obviously the senior decision maker, but my father was really an extraordinary individual in collaborating with his family and with his children. So we had a lot of freedom to challenge the status quo and to ask the question, why? Why are we doing things in a certain way? And our operation evolved tremendously over the years as a result of that freedom to challenge. And
so it sounded like your dad was more a nurturer than a strict father
Definitely.
figure.
And very empathic.
Yes.
Indeed, very empathic.
Very empathic.
And I think the real turning point for him, he didn't like using pesticides. On an intuitive level, he knew that they were not optimal and not something he wanted to be doing, but he didn't know of any alternatives. And I think this is true for many farmers. They feel stuck, they feel trapped.
Yes.
And they do not know what the options are. And I was very fortunate to receive a scholarship to attend the Acres USA conference when I was 17. And
where was that held?
That was in St. Paul, Minnesota that year.
Mm.
And my father and brother attended that with me. And as a part of the scholarship, we also were given the opportunity to attend a 3-day course. It was held by Arden Anderson, who was both a medical doctor and an agronomist. And the first day of the 3-day course, Arden spent almost exclusively describing the physiological impacts of pesticides on the human body. My father sat there and listened to that for an entire day. And at the end of the day, when we walked out of the room, he said, "I'm done. I'm going to get rid of my pesticide distributor license, and we are not continuing to sell pesticides."
Awesome.
Wow.
Awesome.
Wow. So how long do you think that transformation, well, I guess in your story, it was like at least 3 years. You had terrible crops for 3 years. And
There's
then
always the transition. Yeah.
how long do you think that transition for your dad and you were part of that intervention? How long do you think that transition took?
Well, change is always an individual process. For me and for my dad, it happened relatively quickly. But I think this is actually an important point. Change or transition or regeneration, whatever verb you choose, does not occur first in the field. It occurs first in our hearts and minds. And then it can manifest in our work and in the field. And so in terms of how it manifested for us, 2005 was a transition year. And by 2016, we were completely pesticide free and have been completely pesticide free ever since.
Wow.
And that speed of transition is different for different people. Some growers in some contexts are comfortable with a rapid transition, and others may take 4 or 5 years or 7 years. And some may not be able to imagine in this moment how they could ever get to that point in the future. But as time goes by and as they experience the possibilities and the opportunities, their perspective begins to change as well.
Marie, we hadn't heard from you. Or do you want to engage John in any way?
I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm good. Thank you.
I'd like to make a couple comments about empathy and understanding and getting, into the other person's world and understanding where they're coming from, what they believe, what they don't believe, what they feel, what they're concerned about. And because I've been trying to work with different cultures, and we here in the West, we're very rich compared to the rest of the world. And now we indulge ourselves with worrying about recycling, which is of course a good thing, but then we think that people in other countries would be worried about the same thing. And it's not true. You have to get to know people and understand what they value. And it was such a letdown to me to find out that most people in India do not want to deal with recycled products that have been made out of other things. And you think, oh my gosh, how can we deal with this? How can we move forward? But it's true. You have to get to know the other people, go there, live with them. And then the answers come. Like my daughter and I, we worked down in Guyana. They need wash, they need sanitation, they need toilets. And they're very educated people, including the former Minister of Agriculture, who says to me, we don't care anything about toilets. That's okay, we take care of that. That's no problem. And they'll build a new house and they'll have a little outhouse in the backyard. And you think, oh my gosh, what's going on here? So, but it's the whole empathy thing. And we went to see the latest movie, Black Widow. And Black Widow is all about mind control. And how did they fight that? They created little vials of red fluid that they could throw into a group, and it reversed mind control. And all of a sudden people became empathic.
Wow.
And I'm just amazed how throughout our culture now, in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's empathy, 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 empathy. And I'm just so happy that the world is opening up and being much more receptive and seeing that it's the thing now. And
I would suggest that the next step, a relatively easy next step, I think, for many people, is not just to develop empathy with other people, other individuals, but to develop empathy with animals, both domestic and wild, to develop empathy with plants,
yes,
to develop empathy with ecology, to develop empathy with the landscape.
yes, yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. I just saw a wonderful program about mother trees. Yes. Yeah.
John, before I forget, I'm at a certain age that something pops up and I better write it down or say it or forget it. But, that inner, you describe, that inner motivation, what that really drives intervention is the inner self, the empathic part of oneself where the intervention takes place. And our mentor, Dr. George Lakoff, would he's right there with you. And the way he describes it is that all ideas are physical. There is no idea that exists outside of the human body. And so those ideas have to get into the human body some way, and they're put there through language and shared experience. And one of the things that he talks about, two thoughts that came out that that I want to share with you is one is that reframing the world that you want from the world that you don't want. Reframing is an internal activity, an activity of ideas, which he says is action, because there's action going on. It's all, if all ideas are physical, when ideas are being generated, that's an action. And so I want to suggest that, for you to embrace the language of inner work as active, because your story, there's a little dissonance in your story when you say we're a person of action. You told us a story of an inner journey, which is not just physical body action, that kind of thing. So I want to say that's one thing. Then the last thing is, when it comes to policy, Dr. Lakoff talks about the two components of any kind of policy. Maybe it's business policy, maybe it's public policy, whatever it is. Maybe it's the ask. Maybe you're getting ready to ask somebody to do something. There are two components to that. There's the material component, which is the nuts and bolts of what you want to see happen. And typically we get caught up in that all the time. That's where we dwell. But the other component is the cognitive / moral / empathic component. That's, where that you're talking about, and I just wanted to give you another way of talking about it, because Lakoff says, we're quoting facts all the time. Like you said, it doesn't move anybody, unless you can talk about the moral reason, why is it that I'm so passionate about X? Why is it? And, and your story tells me, it's because you care. You grew up in a caring, a nurturing family, that taught you to not only care about them, but other people as well. But even better, I mean, lots of people have empathy. You have this strong commitment that so many people lack because they don't know what to do, but you've got this commitment. You're on a mission to activate your empathy and your responsibility to others. And I think, from a policy point of view, when you talk about, you can just maybe talk about the policy stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling now, but you know where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Yeah. To respond to your first point, and actually a little bit to your second as well. I grew up, excuse me, I grew up in a family with a Judeo-Christian worldview and culture. English is actually a second language for us. We first learned to speak and read German. And there is this Bible verse that I think speaks directly to what you're describing, but this verse is commonly misunderstood, a little bit like the Golden Rule. And I'm used to reading this in German, so I'll paraphrase it into English, but it says something to the effect of, "Be ye transformed through the renewing of your mind." That's what it says in English. Except that's not what it says in German. And it's actually not what it really meant in the original Hebrew as well. Instead, in the original Hebrew, and the way that it reads in German, is it says, "Be you transformed through the renewing of your heart." Not your mind, but your heart. And so I think what you're describing is this process of imagination. The process of dreaming and visualizing the future is really a process of creating a mental image of what the possibilities are and what the future could look like, and creating the more clearly we can create an image of the future possibilities that we desire to see, the change that we want to see in the world, the better we can illustrate that for other people. Now we are able to communicate with their hearts, because we are communicating in images that speak to the heart and not logic that speaks to the mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautifully said.
Exactly,
Beautifully
yeah.
said. And yes, we do say that, be the change you want to see in the world. You have to be the change. Yes. Yes.
Well, this is great. This is really good stuff, John. And I've made some notes, and the so what's the future for you in terms of partnerships? Do you do any partnering with other organizations?
We have many very collaborative relationships with other organizations where we recommend their products or services to the people that we work with, and vice versa. So yes, we have many collaborative relationships, and the purpose that we have set for the company of advancing eco-agriculture, I have no aspirations of this company becoming a future Bayer or Kempf China, where we work with the majority of farmers around the world. That's not really the objective. The objective is to provide such extraordinary results, to provide such an extraordinary shift in profitability and in success and in economic incentives of the growers that we work with, that other companies in this space globally are forced to change the way they do business as a result of our presence in the marketplace. And so we want to set such an extraordinarily high bar of excellence that other people have no choice except to compete with us and to imitate us. And we're successfully executing on that, which makes me kind of happy.
That's great. That's great. Well, I can't tell you how much we appreciate your being here, and the getting you here is sort of a testament of your of the demand on your time, and you know, it took us a while to get you here, and we weren't. And what we got was, I guess, if I had listened to some of your podcasts, you know, I would have been prepared. But it's been a real delight for you to be on the program. And I don't know if you've been to our website or not, but invite you to pursue that. Check us out. But you know, we're trying to be for the empathic world, the nurturant world, what we would call the progressive world. We're trying to be for them what some of the degradation that's taken place to the country through what we call extreme conservatism has, and their vast network of think tanks teaching people how to think and talk in a conservative way that's brought us virtually to the brink existential abyss. You know, how do we reframe that? And so that's our particular mission, and we would love to partner with others who have similar missions. And part of what cognitive scientists like Dr. Lakoff and Elizabeth Whaling are telling us is that no matter your passion, you know, if you're you're progressive, if nurturance is your inner being, we haven't yet found a common narrative between the different kinds of progressives that are out there. And Dr. Lakoff has identified about a half a dozen different groups of progressives, and we all sort of are in our little silos, you know. And so our vision is, how do we bring all those progressives in, learn a little bit about cognitive science and reframing, and how the brain works, and in terms of linguistics and communication, so that when you're talking about your passion, you're building, you know, an infrastructure that helps some other progressive group. You know, right now we're so stuck in our silos that when we speak, we're not helping those other groups. But if we can build a common narrative, then every time we're talking about our stuff, we're helping those other groups. So we'd love for you to consider being our guests at some of our, and of course it's about thinking, you know, action, thinking, you know, reframing and thinking is action, we think. That
Language
work is important.
Language and words are extraordinarily powerful.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is much more
Yes.
powerful to be for something than it is to be against something. It's much more
Absolutely.
powerful to use positive phraseology than negative.
Yes.
And I think within the agricultural world, I am actively seeking to develop a different lexicon. I chose to not use the words diseases and weeds and pathogens,
Yes.
because in reality, all those organisms that we perceive and tag with those labels only carry those labels in our perception as a result of our mismanagement of the ecosystem. And so we've identified that as something that needs to evolve, but haven't made much progress yet. Other than
you're doing yeah.
I do like the German word for weeds is Heilkräuter, which is translated healing herbs.
Nice.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Listen, John, I'm going to stop our recording here, and I don't want you to go anywhere, but I'm going to stop our recording, and I want to thank you so much for being with us. Hang on a second.
So.
Don't go anywhere. But for YouTube audience, goodbye. So, so we're